Welcome to the Politicrat. It is Wednesday, June the 10th, 2020. I'm Omar Moore. On this episode of the Politicrat, a conversation with Shaista Aziz. She is an Oxford councillor for Labour in the city of Oxford in England. We will be talking about the removal of statues in the UK, specifically Cecil Rhodes, the colonialist and white racist in the UK. That conversation, which includes an examination of where England is at the moment around removal of colonialists and around the discussion of racism in institutions, next. Welcome back. There were a couple of interruptions. Technology will do that to you. And unfortunately, those did happen during the course of this conversation. But nonetheless, we persisted. Now, here on the Politicrat podcast, I have a very special guest from Oxford, England. It is the Oxford councillor, Shaista Aziz. She is the Oxford councillor for Labour. She is also an activist on matters of the homeless, on matters of race and equities, and also she is a journalist, and she has just a few minutes with us today to talk about the statues and the issues around them, and particularly Cecil Rhodes. And can you tell us, Shaista, and by the way, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for the work you're doing as well, especially in the current crisis. We seem to be in a constant crisis, so thank you for that. So as you said, I'm in Oxford, England, as they say over there in the USA. This is my home city where I was born and raised. I was elected as a councillor, so I'm a local government official, so to speak, 2 years ago. And it's been a very busy week, shall we say. The world has been seeing images from my city in relation to the Cecil Rhodes statue, which is a statue on our high street, so the main kind of street in the centre of our city. And yesterday, an estimated 3,000 people took to the streets peacefully. They sat down in the middle of the road and they demanded that Rhodes must fall. So Cecil Rhodes is a British imperialist, a proud British imperialist. He was a man who made a lot of money on the broken backs of black people who were enslaved. He had connections to South Africa, and he was a white supremacist, a loud, proud white supremacist. And his statue has been on a listed building in Oxford for a very long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. But in the recent years, there's been a movement by students at the University of Oxford to bring the statue down. And the reason for that is because the students have been saying that, they want to know why the University of Oxford is glorifying an imperialist, glorifying a man who Hitler went on record to praise. And it's very problematic. It's linked to Britain's colonial legacy. It's also linked, obviously, to the colonisation of South Africa. We know that black South Africans are still in recovery from that colonisation. And so this movement, and it was started by students in Oxford, connections with students in South Africa as well. And this movement then has grown on to demand that the University of Oxford decolonises as an institution, and it decolonises its curriculum as well. So the reason why I've gone into that backstory is because something very significant has happened since the murder of George Floyd. As we know, around the world there's been mass open anti-racism protests. Here in the UK we have a Black Lives Matter movement as well. But prior to the murder of George Floyd, the Rhodes Must Fall movement primarily was very much focused on the University of Oxford and the students and the academics at the University of Oxford, with a sprinkling of other people. It was never really, though, connected to the city of Oxford and the people of Oxford. So what we've seen is a big shift in the way the protest has evolved, and we are now seeing people from our city actively involved, demanding that this statue is removed and connecting it to the broader Black Lives Matters UK movement, connecting it to what's happening in the United States, and connecting it to the broader disparities in racial injustice here in the UK. So, for example, very similar to the United States, there's a disproportionate number of Black people and racially minoritized people dying during the pandemic of COVID-19, which obviously we're still in as well. So all of these issues, along with very stark realities in relation to government policy that has been around for a long time, but that is really impacting especially the lives of Black British people. So I'm sure you possibly have heard of the hostile environment policy, which is an immigration policy that the British government established a few years ago, but it's disproportionately impacting Black people. We've had the Windrush scandal as well, which I'm sure you've heard of over in the United States as well. I know immigration obviously is a hot issue in the United States, it's deeply racialized as well. So all of these issues, along with the fact that we're seeing rising levels of inequality and poverty and deprivation, and it's deeply racialized. And as I said, COVID-19 is bringing all of this out. So this is a backdrop behind this protest that we had yesterday. And also, what we are seeing now is, I've not seen this before, we're seeing the beginnings of a national conversation, might be exaggerated, but the beginnings of a dialogue, the beginnings of something that's going on where people are asking questions.
Yes, asking questions, and I unfortunately don't hear you at the moment. There, you just cut out, such as Skype. But
are you still there?
I am still here. I hope that you can hear me.
I can hear you. Yes. So I was saying that basically in this country, nobody wants to talk about race. Nobody wants to talk about race. Nobody wants.
Oh dear! Again, I know that Skype can be troublesome. So
better, Omar. Is that better?
That's better now. You had just mentioned that the last thing I heard you say is that nobody wants to talk about race in the UK, in England, and I definitely agree with you on that. But yes, I don't know what else you had said, but I definitely agree with you about that. Here in the US, there are some people who don't want to talk about race, or they deny it. In my native country, where you sit as well, there has been always a reluctance to talk about it. And also there's been pushback, a lot of it, as you've talked about. There's been a lot of hypocrisy, and a lot of, I think, as you point out in your BBC interview, the whataboutism. And you've got people like Nick Ferrari of LBC talking about, what does that have to do with improving Black lives? I mean, it's just completely fictitious arguments and comments that are being made. Rather than them having a constructive dialogue with you, they are putting out these reactionary responses that just make no sense, and it trivializes everything that you have just laid out here.
Yeah, and thank heavens that Skype is working, right? Because we can now get into a conversation. So, yeah, what we have in the UK and what we've had for decades is a national gaslighting. People of colour, particularly Black people, are gaslighted every single day. We don't see race, we don't see colour, all those things. They've been going round and round in circles. And the thing is now, it's interesting you mentioned Nick Ferrari, who is a very well-known radio presenter here in the United Kingdom. I was on his show this morning at 7 a.m. So I got the coffee on very early for that, right? And he was actually starting to do this, and I was like, no, we're not having this. So I was explaining to him what was going on in Oxford. So it's very interesting. But I think more than any other time, it's impossible. It's really impossible for the establishment, for the media in this country that is overwhelmingly white, upper class, people who've been to Eton Eton, people who've been to private school, people who've been to Oxbridge, to deny race. But of course they deny it. But we have got to a situation in this country, which is obviously different to the United States and similar-ish as well, I guess, where it's just in your face, okay? It's impossible to ignore. People continue to ignore it, but you can't hide from it anymore. So what we've been seeing now in the last sort of 10 days is this extraordinary kind of performative circus, which is moving at a very rapid pace, but then sprinklings of really honest, painful realizations and discussions, and people coming together to try and have those conversations. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's some genuine work being done, and then there's the other stuff, the optics and all of that, the performative allyship, which we could, that's kind of part and parcel of things, right? But there is something going on, and yesterday, the amazing Angela Davis was on British television, and she was saying that there is something going on here. She said that there is an energy that cannot be denied, and there is a momentum that cannot be denied. And I think perhaps for those of us who are a bit cynical, because we may work in the media, or we're just kind of sick to the back teeth of this, I think it's really important to remember that there is something going on. There's something profound going on. So in the city that I was born and raised in, this is a very white city. This is an internationalist city. The whole world knows Oxford. The whole world understands the power of Oxford, how many world leaders have come through this city, and how many are responsible for the current carnage that we're facing, right? So despite that, 3,000 people.
You're talking about 3,000 people who have... you were talking about 3,000 people.
Yeah, so 3,000 people from our city, residents of this city, marching for Black Lives Matter, marching for Rhodes must fall, marching for racial justice, marching for accountability from the authorities in this country in relation to all the things we've talked about already, and also marching for George Floyd and what happened to him, and what's happened to countless other, well, I say countless because literally people forget to count, right? They forget to name the black men and the black women, as you know.
And Berry Majinga.
So the countless victims. And here in this country as well, we have very serious problems that have been going on for years. So I think the fact that 3,000 people did march yesterday, and they are people of this city, predominantly working class people who are locked out of the city of Oxford. So this city of Oxford is like a magnificent, magical place in many ways. It kind of looks like Harry Potter land. That's what the tourists tell you, right? But if you live here and you're not from that world, you don't get to access this world, right? So I remember as a kid getting on the bus and going through the centre of Oxford thinking, oh, this is my city. But this city is locked. I'm locked out from this city. So as a woman with a lot of agency, I'm still locked out. But there are plenty of people from this city who don't have the same agency that I have, and they're locked out as well. So this protest, I think, also is really about this massive institution that's internationally recognised and what its relationship is with the people of our city. It doesn't really have one, frankly, right? And today they've issued a statement, the university, what about saying that, Cecil Rhodes Scholarship has benefited a lot of Africans. And then, of course, whenever you want to dismiss racism, you do two things, right? What do privileged white people do? They usually try and start quoting Martin Luther King at you, the whitewashed version, the depoliticized version, right?
Right.
Or, guess what? Nelson Mandela pops up, right? So they went for option 2. University's vice chancellor went for option 2. He started quoting Nelson Mandela, and it's like, no, don't go there. Just don't, right? It's just a bit embarrassing, isn't it, really?
It really is. It really is. And it's also, quite frankly, I also think it is a form of racism too, because you're saying, well, if this one black person says it, that means every one of you black people has to also say it, fall in line with him, shut up and go home. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
Well, that's what it is, right? It's just shameful, and I mean, when are they going to listen? That's the we've had enough of this. We're still taking to the streets because we still believe in democracy, and we believe in people power, and we believe in protest, and we believe in solidarity, which is why we're on the streets. So the very minimum, what I'd say to the University of Oxford, and what I have been saying to them, is show some humility. Just show some humility, have a dialogue. But I think this also really does show power at work, and how, power never concedes, right? And it's like, even now, they're busy ignoring and erasing the people of the city. So it's just unacceptable. And honestly, I'm not sure who's doing their PR, but whoever it is, they need to go and find someone better, really, because this is not good.
Right. One other quick question or two, with your kind indulgence, is one of the things that I was dying to ask you is do you see the movement now as a more generational thing? Do you find that the opposition typically comes from people of a certain age, quote unquote, versus those who are fully in support of the movement in the UK being people who are perhaps a little bit younger? Is that because, we know historically younger people tend to be the ones who fuel these movements. Do you see pretty much the same thing here with the Rhodes Must Fall movement?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because I do think there's parallels with what I'm seeing in the United States, right? So I was speaking to some activists from the US over the weekend who are part of Black Lives Matter, and they were saying that this is a working class, multiracial movement in the United States. They're saying this has not been seen in a long, long time, if ever, and they're saying that this is really important to note this and to observe it. And I feel the same thing here. I'm seeing it, right? So it is a movement led, as it should be, by black people and people of colour, but there are a lot of young white people who are joining, and then there's also older people who I feel have a lot of wisdom and knowledge, and they have fought these battles, but perhaps in a very polite British way they gave up a little bit too soon because they kind of thought, well, we've done as much as we can, right? So they're there, and they're the front and the back, and that's really important because I feel that we have a lot to learn from every generation, right? But without a doubt, it's a very multiracial protest movement. And as I said, it is about all the things we discussed, but it's also about class. And class is, in this country, again, where nobody wants to talk about class, by the way, as you know, class is always the elephant in the room, always, right? But there is this complete, absurdity where in the UK, the only time you talk about class is when you talk about the white working class. And often, well, more than often, the white working class are talked about and they're talked at, okay? There is never a two-way dialogue, but this whole thing about only white people can be working class, and it's like, hello, folks, have you read the history of this country? Do you see what's the current history of this country? The fact that during this pandemic, large numbers of black people and people of colour are dying in this country, they are, the class factor doesn't even matter. They can be upper-class doctors and senior consultants and, surgeons, or they can be the people on the 0-hour contracts, getting on public transport, literally chancing their lives with COVID-19 in the air, right? Getting to the hospital to go and clean it, the porter in the hospital, the woman, who's a cleaner, all of those things, right? And it's like they just erase our stories and our histories from the DNA of this country. And there's pushback going on. We're done. We're really bored, and we're done. And I feel that this is a movement. I do think that. I really do. I think that it will stop and start. We've got to be realistic. If this requires a lot of energy, people are exhausted. But I think something very profound is going on. And already in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, there's a lot of things going on. So the slave traders statue was pulled down in the city of Bristol, as everyone's seen.
Colston.
Then we had Colston. Then we had the protest in Oxford yesterday. Today, Liverpool University has announced that it will be looking into its own historical links with the slave trade. We've had the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, announce a review of statues connected to slavery in London. So something is going on. Something very profound is going on. Obviously, it's being couched as some sort of culture war in this country, which is really to be expected. But I think that decency will prevail. I really do. I think this is the moment for change, and it will take time, but it's happening.
Right. And structures, I mean, the statues are the first step. There's so many other components that obviously have to come into play. And also the about systemic components that have to come into play: education, healthcare, jobs, all these other kinds of things, representations in positions of power across the board. And obviously also what to replace those statues with. Obviously black people, historical figures who are black, who fought for freedom and justice, who built the UK, particularly after World War II. People in the Windrush generation who should have monuments built to them all over Parliament Square and all over the country. I mean, so there's so many pieces of this that have to be addressed. And then there's also, if I can just ask you, I guess, about these other statues. Some people say, well, Churchill shouldn't go or he should go. Do you have any distinctions at all with these figures? Some who may have been enslavement traders or owners of black people as property versus those who may have said racist things but perhaps did not engage in the enslavement trade. That's the real question I wanted to ask you, Shaista.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are, that we shouldn't apply a hard and fast rule to this. What we should be doing is what we're doing here, which is having a thoughtful, calm, nuanced conversation where you're listening to me and I'm listening to you. Now, perhaps we are on the same page, which is why we're able to listen. But even if we're not on the same page, we still have to listen. We have to be able to have a conversation that is going to be uncomfortable, but that will enable us to at least understand each other. Now, this may sound a bit kind of right on, but this is just a fact, right? So, for example, yesterday I did an interview for the BBC, and the presenter, a radio interview, he was saying, the forefathers have potentially committed crimes, and do people still have to renounce their forefathers, and do they have to make up for it? And I said, well, how about this? I said, how about if you're a black man and your forefather was taken and enslaved, and generations were enslaved, and you don't even know what your name is. You don't know what your family name is. So I said, so what about that forefather? What's your response to the grandson or the great-grandson, the great-granddaughter or the daughter of that individual? And I said, this is the thing. I said, pain and trauma is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. And, I'm not going to equate, these slave masters' trauma with the enslaved, because that's not going to happen, right? But my point is, if we just look at this from a very humane level, then we have to get down to that humane level. We have to get down to that granular humane level, and we have to start asking those questions, rather than these, really ridiculous, frenzied kind of tabloid headlines about, where things like right now in this country, the headlines are, where will this end? It's like, what do you mean, where will this end? This hasn't even started, right? We haven't even got started. We're not in the middle yet, let alone in the end. And we're not asking for anything other than justice, okay? We're asking for justice. We're asking for a recognition. We're asking for a reckoning of the truth, okay? In this country, we are not taught about this country's history, which is why we have Brexit, okay? Now, I know people around the world have been scratching their heads wondering what the hell is going on with Brexit, and I'd like to be clear, there's many Brits who are doing the same thing, right? In fact, we don't really hear about Brexit anymore because we've got too much, we've got a pandemic going on and everything else, Black Lives Matter going on, so no one really talks about Brexit anymore, right? It's like we look forward to those nostalgic days when we could talk about Brexit, But anyway, that was a joke, by the way. The point is that if a country doesn't know about its history, how is it ever going to make peace with its present, right? And this is a really profound moment in this country's history. And I think that because the security has disappeared, right? So, the pandemic has taken away a ones, mental health. People no longer know what's happening from day to day. And so it's causing a lot of anxiety. And then I think on top of that, this whole, these images of statues being toppled. By the way, they're not being toppled, just to be very clear, okay? One was removed by a council in London, in the Docklands, to do with the slave trade. One was toppled in Bristol, and one is hanging up on the third floor of a historic building in Oxford, and there's many more, right? So let's just be very clear. It's not like there's anarchy in the UK and people are running around with topics.
Right.
Which, I'm not sure how Fox News is telling this story, but I just want everyone to know that's not happening, right? So, that's not happening. It's never happened. It won't happen. And perhaps it shouldn't happen either. Perhaps what needs to happen is just what we're saying, where we actually have a truthful dialogue and we reach consensus on what needs to happen. But yeah, I do think it's a really profound moment. But I think we have to start with our schools, with our curriculum. We've got to diversify the kind of way we are taught about history. We're not taught history. We're not taught anything, really. We're taught about the Tsars and the Tudors and all of this. But when it comes to imperial history, which is British history, nothing, right?
Right.
We're talking about the Industrial Revolution. It's not, where did all that, what was going on? Where was the cotton coming from?
Right.
Where was all this coming from? We're never told about that.
Right. No, I remember as a kid growing up in England, it was all about the royals and the Tudors and all this lovely history, and the British royals were perfect and they didn't steal anything from the continent of Africa. It was all glossed over and whitewashed, if you will. And there was nothing at all that talked about enslavement, about you colonizing the African continent, taking its jewels and using them as the crown jewels and doing all of these things. It was completely sanitized. And I think what's going on in my native land, your native land, is now there is a reckoning. People are beginning to face these uncomfortable things. Some people never will face them. There are the Nick Ferraris of the world, and I don't mean to spotlight him, but he's one of them, and others who won't face this reality. They are of a time, the Daily Mail types who are of a time that, no, we don't want any conversation about this, and we're going to demonize and sensationalize. And then there are other people who I think are willing to open their ears and start to listen. And that is, as you point out, Shaista, an important first step. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about the movement? Where do you see it going? Any other thoughts that you want to provide for the listening audience?
Yeah, so I agree with your analysis, but I will also say to you, having spoken to Nick Ferrari this morning, the conversation was in a different tone to what I expected it to be fair to him, right? So I think the only thing to say is that it's incredible what's going on. It's very moving what's going on. I think that I've not been to the US for a number of years, okay, but I remember the first time I went to the United States, I was like, what is going on here? What is going on? People kept saying to me, "Ma'am, are you from Afghanistan?" And I was like, "Well, damn, you know where it is, right?" I was like, so my bar was very low, okay? But I was like, no, I'm from the UK. And then I remember hamming up my very English accent, darling. Where can I get a cup of tea and all of that? Because, that works quite well over there, as you know.
Yes.
But it's devastating to see, actually, the state of the United States. It's devastating to see this white supremacist in power, being given power because he's a white supremacist, and I think we are in a moment in world history where everything is laid out open for everyone to see. As we said at the beginning of the conversation, people will continue to deny, but it's all there. You can't deny it anymore. So you've got to make up your mind now without sounding like Trump, heavens forbid, right? There's no two sides. Whose side are you on? What do you believe in? What do you hold dear? And then what are you going to do? Okay? So I feel that's where we are. And I feel that I am someone who genuinely really believes in compassion. I believe deeply in compassion, okay? I don't believe in hugging Nazis, just to be very clear. I don't believe in that kind of, fun girling over, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. My point is, I think a people are really traumatized. Honestly, I do. I feel, particularly with a lot of white people that I know, I've spent all my life working with white people. I'm born and raised in the city of Oxford, I feel like I understand whiteness in a very sophisticated way. And one of the things whiteness does is silences you. And I feel that I have the power to speak clearly because I didn't have the luxury to be silenced, because everyone was busy silencing me as a woman of colour, as a visible Muslim woman who wears a hijab, etc., etc. So it was sink or swim. I had no choice, right? But I really do believe that white people are amongst the most emotionally repressed people I've ever met in my life, because everything, their world, tells them to stay silent, to be quiet, to always be second-guessing what's going on around them, and to really numb yourself. And I think that's a really painful state as a human being. And I've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of friends who are white, and it's really painful to hear them. I'm like, damn, I'm like, people are looking at me thinking I'm oppressed. I'm like, I'm totally cool. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself, right?
Right.
So I think that's where we're at. I think we're at a moment in history where we all have to dig deep and look at ourselves and what we're doing or not doing and take responsibility. So, as a woman of colour, obviously not a black woman, and as a visible Muslim woman, I've got to deal with the anti-blackness amongst Muslims, right? I obviously don't know every single Muslim who would know that, right? But, my heritage is South Asian. There's massive legacy of anti-blackness across South Asian communities. We see it in the diaspora community. We see it everywhere. Hassan Minhaj made a video a few days ago where he talked about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have a responsibility. So my responsibility is to go deep and tackle anti-blackness amongst British, South Asian, particularly Pakistani, that's my background, communities, and tackle it, and not to shy away from it, but to tackle it and to bring people with me and get people to do the work, right? Whereas my white friend's job, frankly, is to tackle white supremacy, to tackle the structures of whiteness, and to stop, the tribe from being defensive and get on with the program, right?
Right.
So the point is, we all have a role to play, every single one of us, and even though I'm seen as a racialized woman, and obviously gender and misogyny play into this as well, I'm not looking at people going, oh, you're a white supremacist, and going, I've got nothing to do here myself. I know I've got a lot of work to do, and I'm trying to do the work. And I think that this moment in history has made me understand even more that I have to do this work. I have to do it faster, and I have to do it harder than before, and I have to bring more people to do it. Yeah. So I say this deliberately because I think we all have to look at ourselves.
Absolutely.
We have to understand the role we play.
Absolutely. I could talk to you for another hour, but I know that I can't do that. I would love to have another conversation with you in the future, Shaista. I really would.
Well, thank you so much, Omar. Thank you for having me on. I'm really glad that we persevered with our conversation.
Yes.
Thank you for not losing your accent completely either. I can still hear it, brother.
Thank you very much. Be well. Take care now. Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Once again, special thanks to Shaista Aziz for her time and for coming on this edition of The Politicrat. Shaista Aziz is the Oxford Councillor for the Labour Party in the city of Oxford. She is a journalist and also an advocate and activist for racial justice and also for the homeless. And again, thank you so much to her. I want to thank her again for her time. And thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.